Hi there, my spectacular speakers. Are you ready to take your public speaking game to the next level? Well, you come to the right place because this is the Sensational Speakers Lounge show. Join us live every Thursday at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, here where you get tips, tricks, and inspiration to help you become a confident, captivating speaker. I'm Deborah Northcutt, your speaker support concierge. So let's get ready to put on your comfy pants, grab your favorite beverage, and get ready for the Sensational Speakers Lounge show because we are getting ready to start. Today, I'm going to be talking about unleash your expertise, the benefits of being a podcast guest speaker. Now, before I get started, let me know where you're watching from. What city and state are you watching from? And if you're watching the replay, make sure that you put your questions and comments in the comment section, and I'll make sure that I come back and circle around and answer any questions and comments that you might have. And I want to thank you for watching me today. And feel free to share this live with your friends, your family, your fans, and any other speaker that might need to hear this message. Now, I have a free checklist for you, and it's 24 support activities that I can do for you. So make sure that you go to bit.ly/support activities to download your free gift. That's bit.ly/support activities to download your free gift. Also, the link for this bit.ly should be in the description. If not, I have it scrolling across the bottom of the screen. I'll say that one more time. bit.ly/support activities. Now, let's discuss what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to talk about the benefits of being a podcast guest speaker. Now, there are benefits to being a podcast, excuse me. Oh, sorry. Sorry, I had to sneeze. There are benefits to being a podcast guest speaker. It's you don't get paid, not monetarily, but there are other ways to use your guest appearance in a monetary fashion. I'm also going to talk about, excuse me, I'm also going to talk about how to get started being a guest on a podcast show and how to promote your appearance after the show, because that's important too, promoting yourself and promoting your spot on a podcast show. Now, as I said, I'm going to talk about the benefits of being a podcast guest speaker. Now, if you're an expert in your field and you want to increase your visibility and your credibility, then this live is for you. Not only do I help speakers get speaking gigs, that's one of the things that I do as a speaker support concierge, I also help you get on podcast shows. Now, if you need help getting on podcast shows, then contact me by scheduling a time on my calendar for us to talk to see if we're a good fit. Now, the link to my calendar is also in the description of uh, this Facebook Live. Now, podcast shows have been around for a long time. Do you have an idea of how long podcast shows have been around? Because when I found out how long podcast shows have been around, I was surprised. I thought that they just recently came, into existence. Well, since I have nobody guessing here of how long podcast shows have been around, I'll tell you. They've been around since 2004. Can you believe that? 2004 podcast guests have been around. That's 19 years, guys. 19 years podcasts have been around. Now, what is a podcast? You might be asking. Sorry. A podcast is the streaming's age answer to radio. Now, the dictionary definition of a podcast is a digital audio file you can download or listen to over the internet. Podcast started out as a completely audio medium. However, with the growing popularity of podcasts, many podcasts have embraced video podcasting as a way to stand out and reach an even bigger audience. Now, we know that video is extremely popular, right? I say that video is king. So, podcast creators who want their show to see more growth and appeal to a wider audience are adding video elements to their podcasts. But most podcast shows are audio. Now, when you submit yourself to a podcast show, the podcast host should let you know if it's going to be a video show or if it's going to be an audio show. So you need to ask that question when you're having your interview with the podcast host, because she or he will definitely interview you to make sure that you're a good fit for their show before you get started. And any questions that you might have about being a guest on the podcast show, that's when you ask your questions also. Now, how do you get started being a guest on a podcast show? The first thing you want to do is you want to research the podcast show. You want to see if the show aligns with your area of expertise, because they have thousands and thousands of podcast shows out there for you to choose from. So there definitely is a podcast show that does align with your area of expertise. You want to look for podcast shows with a large and engaged audience, as well as podcast shows that regularly feature guests in your field. All podcast shows don't feature guests. There's some podcast shows that it's just the podcast host out there talking. You can't call into the podcast show. You can't be a guest on a podcast show. So make sure that you're getting the right podcast show that fits your niche of what you talk about. And also, they offer guests to come on their show. Then, after you find out what podcast shows do offer a guest and it fits your niche, then you want to read the reviews of the podcast show. What are people saying about the podcast show? Because they have all different podcast shows out there. Some have been out there longer than others. If you're new to podcasting, or if you're new as a speaker, and when I say new, you've been out there speaking less than 5 years, you want to make sure that you choose a podcast show that hasn't been out there for a long period of time. It's easier to get on podcast shows that have just started or been out there less than 5 years. So what you want to do is you want to start by seeing how many people are talking about this podcast show. And if they have a website, you definitely want to check that out too. Why do you want to check out the website? Because that's a great way for you to find out about the host of the podcast show. You want to read their About Me page. Read, what are they about? What do they believe in? What do you, the speaker, have in contact with that host, that when you're pitching to them, you can use that in your pitch? You both might like the same things, or you both might been around for the same period of time. Whatever you can find on the website, that, as I said, that you can use in your pitch, that that you can tell the host of the podcast show. Another way to find out, you know, when you're researching the podcast show, go to Google Trends and find out what kind of podcast shows are out there and what kind of reviews that they're getting. Then you want to check out the ratings of the podcast show, because all podcast shows have different ratings. They use stars to rate podcast shows, and the stars are rated from a 1 to a 5. Now, if the show has a lot of 5-star ratings, then it's a pretty popular podcast show. But if the show has a lot of 2, 3 ratings, then I would say it's not that popular, and or either it's just not been out that long, or people are not really interested in what the guests are saying on that podcast show. So make sure that you definitely do your research of the show. Then once you've done all your research and you figure that this is a great podcast show that I want to get on, that I would love to get on here as a guest, you want to reach out to the podcast host. Now, you want to pitch yourself as a guest speaker to the podcast host. Now, why are you a perfect why are you a perfect person to be on that podcast show? You want to make sure that you explain that to the podcast host, why you're a perfect fit for their show and what can you offer their audience. But I want to tell you this before I go further. You definitely want to have some type of spreadsheet, Google document, Word document, or whatever. However, you want to keep track of each podcast show that you're pitching to. On that spreadsheet, you want to have the name of the podcast show that you pitched to, the name of the host that you pitched to, the date that you pitched, how many times did you follow up to that host. And don't just follow up once or twice. When I follow up, I normally follow up 4 times, sometimes 5. But you don't want to be a pest, but you do want to follow up more than once or twice, definitely. Why do I say that? Because sometimes the host didn't even get your email. I've gotten that. I followed up the 3rd time and they'll come back to me and they'll say, I never received your email. Thanks for following up with me again. I'd love to have your client on my show as a guest. Sometimes your email might go in the spam or they never received it. So it's great and best if you follow up 3, 4 times before you give up following up on that show. And also in your spreadsheet, you want to say what the guest said to you, if you got accepted to the podcast show or not. Or if the podcast show is not even in existence. So you definitely want to keep track of everything that you're doing when you're following up with that podcast host. And before you pitch to that podcast host, make sure that you listen to a couple of episodes of the show to see how the host interviews and what the guests are talking about to see if you can add to that conversation. Let's say that you are a mindset speaker. Well, of course, somebody has been on the show that talked about mindset before you, but you want to see how you can add to that conversation by, saying something different. So make sure that, that you want to add something to the guest as being a guest to the podcast show. Now, some of the shows don't have guest speakers, as I said before. So make sure before you reach out to them that they accept guests on their show. And I'm trying to think of something else that I might want to add to this when it comes to reaching out to the podcast host. I had it in my mind and it kind of slipped my mind. So if I think of it, I will definitely come back to that. Now, before you reach out, you want to have a compelling topic, something that the guest is excited to share with their audience, where their audience can learn from you. Now, when preparing to be a guest speaker, like I said, make sure that your topic is informative, for the guest, for your host that you're submitting to. Have 3 topics that you can, that be a good fit for the audience. Now, if you're a new speaker, you may not have 3 topics. You might just have 1. And that's fine if you have 1. Just make sure that it's a compelling topic and it's something that the guest definitely wants to hear about. Now, by having a compelling topic, this can help ensure that your appearance is valuable and engaging for that guest podcast audience. Now, you definitely want to follow up. And I think I said that in the beginning. Follow up, follow up, follow up. The money is in the follow up. Like I said, make sure that you're following up more than one time, follow up more than twice, follow up three times, follow up four times. I've also found that in following up with podcast hosts, that sometimes their podcast show is not even in existence anymore. And you don't know that because it's still listed in a podcast directory. A great way to find out if the podcast show is still in existence is check out when the last date when they had a guest. If they had a guest and the date was 2000 and let's say 2000 and this is 2023, then you know that that show is probably not no longer in existence. They could have put it on hold. You never know what the reason why the podcast show is not in existence. I've pitched the podcast shows before and they weren't in existence, but they came back to me later and they said, "Oh, I'm so glad that you know that you reached out to us. We were not in existence. We had to shut our show down, but now that we decided to come back online, and we'd love to have your client come on as a guest." But at that time, I didn't have that client anymore. They had moved on, so I didn't have the chance to submit them to that show. And it was a great podcast show. It had great reviews. It had 5 stars. It was right up my client's alley, something for them to talk about. But like I said, they were no longer in existence. But when they did come back online, I didn't have that client anymore. So don't give up on pitching the podcast shows. Just because you may not hear something from them doesn't mean that they might come back to you later and offer you to be a guest on their show. Now, what you want to do after you've been a guest on their show is you want to promote your appearance on the show. Now, after your appearance on the podcast, make sure that you promote it to all your social media channels. Now, as you're having your interview with that podcast host, they're definitely going to ask you, how many people do you have on your social media channels? Now, the reason why they ask you that question is because they want you to promote that to your social media list. And the more people you have on your list, your followers, I should say, the more you're going to promote that show out for the host. And that's going to help the host too. It's going to help people to find out about his or her podcast show. And it's going to go out to people that they probably never had a chance to get in front of. So you definitely want to promote that, your appearance on the podcast show. And you also want to promote it to your email list. And that's why you need to build your email list. You want to promote that out to your email list also. This will help you reach even more people and build momentum for your brand. And as you're a new speaker, you definitely want to get out there and get yourself seen and heard. And also, if you do a great job being a guest on that podcast show, the host might invite you back again at another time. And that's another win-win for you and the host. Now, what are the benefits for being a guest speaker? You get to share your expertise, and it allows you to share your knowledge with a wide audience that you never would have had a chance to get in front of. And I see I have one viewer here. I don't know who you are. I don't see your name, and I don't see any comments from you, but I want to thank you for joining me. And another benefit of sharing your expertise and being a guest on a podcast show is you get to educate people in your area of expertise and solve problems and improve their lives. And you never know, you might pick up some clients from your appearance. I've had some clients of mine that they were uh-oh they were a guest. Sorry guys, this my looks like my show's trying to shut down. But anyway, I've had some clients that were a guest on podcast shows before, and the host became their clients. I've had that happen to two clients of mine. They were guests on their podcast show. The podcast host was so enamored and so, and was so thankful and that they were there and they learned so much from them that they wanted them to coach them too. So you never know what might happen as you being a guest in your appearance on a podcast show. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is establishing yourself as an authority. Being a regular guest on podcast shows can help you as an authority in your field. This helps set you apart from other speakers in your industry and position you as a thought leader. You can gain instant trust and credibility from the host. You get more ROI, and means return on your investment for your efforts of being a guest. You connect with your audience to boost sales. Now, this is where the money comes in. You don't get paid for being a guest on a podcast show, but this is how you can make it to your benefit. And the host is going to ask you once the podcast show is over, well, how can people stay in contact with you? Well, you're going to offer, if you have a freebie, you're going to offer that. You're going to give out your link to your freebie in order to build your contact, your email list. Or if you have a webinar coming up, a seminar coming up, a workshop coming up, or whatever you might have coming up where you can sell to that person in the end, then you want to give that out also. Let them know that, hey, I'm having a webinar come up. This is the link to the webinar. Join my webinar and get more information on whatever the name of your webinar is. And that way you can stay in contact with other people that has joined your webinar, and you can, promote to them that way. Hi, Dr. Violet Taylor. Thanks for joining me. Yeah, the webinar is definitely going to be available, Dr. Violet. I also always have my live later where you can watch the replay. So, catch me from the beginning, watch the replay, and you can catch it from the beginning. But thank you for joining me. Now, also, it increases your visibility, like I said, being a guest on a podcast show, and it helps you to reach a larger audience. And if you just started speaking, you definitely want to get your name out there. You want to get your niche out there. And this is the way to get your name out there and get started by being on podcast shows. Like I said, they have so many podcast shows out there. You should have no problem finding a podcast show that fits your niche. And this is way people who never heard of you before, they get to meet you, they get to know you, they get to like you, they get to know what you're about. So being on a podcast show has a lot of what's the word I want to use? It has a lot of I'm lost for words, guys. It's great. Let me just say it's great being on a podcast show. Me, I've been on a couple of podcast shows myself. Yeah, I was nervous. I'm going to be honest. I was nervous, but after it was over, it was great. It was fun. It got my name out there. I got recognition. I got people to join my email list. So it definitely has a lot of perks. Let me use that word perks of being on a podcast show. Now, not only will you be promoting the podcast episode once it's over, the host is also going to be promoting the podcast episode too to their audience. So that's going to give you more visibility right there. So being on podcast shows is a great thing. You also can network with other experts in your field. It's a great way to meet other thought leaders in your space. And you never know who's listening to you, to your podcast spot. So there's a big possibility that you're reaching the ears of someone significant, like an influencer, where you can build valuable relationships with them and grow your business or advance your career. And I think I've said this over and over, it boosts your credibility and your personal brand. Podcasts are a great way to build trust with your customers because they allow you to share your expertise and your knowledge. And you get great feedback from your audience, and you show that you care about their needs. Your audience can get more comfortable with you with every episode that you're on and gets released. And this can establish you as a trusted and knowledgeable resource in your industry. Now, one thing I want to say If it is a video podcast that you're going to be on, you want to treat it just like you're going to be on stage. You definitely want to be uh, what's the word? I don't know why I keep being lost for words. You definitely want to be cautious about your appearance. You want to make sure that, of course, your hair is combed. You have on a nice shirt or blouse. For ladies, you want to put your makeup on. You might want to wear your brand colors, but you want to treat it just like you're going to be viewed on stage. But and like I said, when you have your interview with the podcast host, she or he will let you know if it's going to be a video podcast or if it's going to be an audio podcast only. If it's going to be on Zoom, if it's going to be on Google Meet, and if you have any questions about the podcast show, your spot on the podcast show, you ask all your questions up front then. So I'm going to recap what I talked about. I talked about the benefits of being a podcast guest speaker. I also talked about how to get started being a guest on a podcast show. And I talked about how to promote your appearance after the show. You definitely want to promote, promote, promote. It's good for you, it's great for the host. Now, this is an excellent opportunity for people to share their knowledge and expertise with a wider audience by being a guest on a podcast show. And don't forget to download your free gift, guys. I have a I have a free checklist, 24 support activities, money making activities, I should say, that I can do for you. So make sure that you go to bit.ly/support activities and download your free gift. Remember, I go live every Thursday at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time on the Sensational Speakers Lounge show. Thanks for watching. I'm Deborah Northcutt, your speaker support concierge. I'll see you next Thursday at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. Bye for now.